All right, so perhaps I'm much too of an online person, but I've seen a lot of commentary and even gotten a few questions about the EIA's reported production numbers for the month of July. So those are reported at the end of September, so last month. Um, given given the questions, and they've been anywhere from mild skepticism to outright conspiracy theories about the production growth that some of the states showed, particularly Texas and New Mexico, in the face of falling rig counts and falling completion crews. That I thought it'd be interesting and good to go over EIA's methodology and how some people compare that methodology to the state reported data and some other areas we can look at to kind of get a grip on what's going on here and if we trust the EIA data or not. Um, so this one will be mostly slide based. We won't dive into the platform at all. Just really quick on the platform, we're exiting beta mode here in the next couple weeks. So version 1.0 of the Plainview platform will be active. So we'll do some videos on that. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to let people test drive the platform, see if it's right for them. Thank you to everyone who provided feedback in the beta period. A lot of improvements were made. A lot of new features will be added. So let's dive into the EIA methodology here. Um, so going over how EIA actually gets their monthly production data that they report. So this will be coming out on Friday, their production data for August. Um, so I thought it'd be good to go over this and just talk about how robust this data set is and, in my opinion, why you should be able to trust this data set. So the largest producers of oil in each state are required to report monthly oil production and condensate production via the EIA 914 form. So the total sample consists of the largest 375 of 15,000 U.S. oil producers. So a lot of people, and me included, looked at that bullet point the first time I read through the EIA's methodology and said, "Wow, you're not capturing most of the oil producers." But what you need to realize is most of the oil producers in the U.S. are tiny, very small, not actually producing that much oil at all. So with this survey data, typically the EIA doesn't require entities producing under 500 barrels per day in the state to report to its survey. So you are missing these really small producers in these states. But even with that, it's notable that they'll cut off the reporters. So the guys that are just not producing very much at all don't have to report via the survey data, but the largest producers do. So the fact that the largest producers have to report means that the EIA aims and does get 85+% of production in each state for every month. So they have reports from the actual producers for 85+% of the production in that state for each individual month. So it's a very robust data set. So with that 85% sample data plus percent sample data, they use a method of weighted least squares to gross that up to get to an estimate of what the actual state is producing. So filling in that, let's call it 10 to 15% that they don't get from the sample data, from the reported data from the producers. So 85%, it's a lot for each state. But it's prone to errors. So it's not perfect data. Since it is survey data, it's a sample. It's a big sample, but it's still a sample. It's still prone to potential errors that could cause it to not be accurate. So those would be listed here, reporting errors. So the data is only as good as what the producers are reporting to the EIA. So a producer that's reporting non-factual data for, it could, I'd say typically not nefarious reasons, but it could be just a mistake that they made, an error that they made. That's potentially going to throw the numbers off of the EIA data. They could have model failure. So the EIA's highlighted rapid changes in basins can cause errors. In their methodology document, they did note the rapid increase in production in the Haynesville and production and development of the Haynesville in the late 2000s caused their model to diverge significantly from what was actual reality. And then you're stuck with sampling error too. So sampling error is just hey, we're not actually getting complete enumeration, or we're not actually getting the data from every well. We're using a sample. So because of the delta between the actual total and the sample, you're going to have some sort of error there. So that's highlighted here, and we can just, two of the states that we're going to look at that were most commonly talked about with the latest production number from the EIA was New Mexico and Texas. And as you can see, the sampling error for those states, when the EIA estimated this in 2018 for the months of January and March, were quite low. So historically, this model has worked well, and I think in my time of looking at this data, 10 plus years, I found it to be pretty accurate. So I trust the EIA data quite a bit. Now, again, it's not perfect, and you should use multiple data sources to confirm things like production when you're in this industry. So looking at the state data can actually be useful, but the state data has pitfalls as well. So we'll look at Texas data here and the rules that Texas has for producers that have to report their production to the state. So all producers are required to submit a monthly PR form. It's a monthly production report for oil and field condensate. It's due on the last working day of the month following the month of production. So really, you're only a month lagged, theoretically, on this. But the Railroad Commission puts some caveats in their reports. They say significant changes to the preliminary production figures will occur in decreasing amounts for approximately 6 to 8 months due to corrected filings and late reports by the industry. So there'll be a theme here as we go into New Mexico as well, as you'll notice that there's because of there appears to be a late reports by a lot of the industry, that the state data actually undershoots in the most recent months. It undershoots what the actual production is, because they don't have all the data from all the industry participants. So commission staff anticipates that once production totals following that period are substantially complete. So after the 6 to 8 months, the Texas Railroad Commission says, hey, the data is probably pretty good. So as we sit here today, in late October, the data for early 2025 is probably pretty good, is the way Texas looks at it. In my analysis, and we'll show this on the next slide, the most recent 4 months of reported EIA data, April to July, show Texas state reported data underreporting compared to EIA by 2, 4, 5, and 8%. And if we go further back, the prior 10 months before that, so June 2024 to March 2025, that's the time period where Texas says this data is pretty good. There is still a delta there. So I've showed the EIA data is about 1% higher than what Texas is reporting. And this just shows the months of lag that the EIA kind of views for each state. So Texas is here, located, circled here. The EIA says they expect about 10 months of lag before they really start to trust the Texas data. And then New Mexico, another state we'll talk about, is 6 months of lag. So if we look at the actual numbers, and you can see them here in table form on the left, graph form on the right, you can see what the state reports for production versus what the EIA reports for production. And then you see kind of what the Railroad Commission explained here is there's going to be an underreporting in the near term because of those late reports from the operators. So I've analyzed this data set for many years now. This is not uncommon. What you're seeing here, it's not uncommon. The size isn't uncommon that I've seen. So this is very typical that these numbers diverge and then converge as you get as we go through time. So as you can see, they closely match back here. I think the EIA switches from their survey methodology to what the state reports as we get back further in time. So those two will very closely match each other. Moving on to New Mexico, so it's another state that reported a pretty significant increase from June to July. And we'll take a look at how they measure their production. And it's similar to Texas. All producers are required to submit a monthly C115 for oil and field condensate. It's due the 15th day of the second month following production, so about 45 days lagged, theoretically. However, they appear, if you look at the data and you look at it historically through time, um, it appears to have similar lag issues that the state of Texas does. So probably not surprising that a lot of the same producers that are producing in Texas and New Mexico, if they're late in Texas, they're probably often late in New Mexico. So they have the lag issue as well, which means the state data in the near term is going to underreport versus what the EIA data says. So I will say the recent differences between the EIA and New Mexico data is large, but it's not unprecedented, and we'll cover that on the next slide here. As you can see, table form on the left, graph form on the right. You can see the divergence between the state and the EIA here, and that is because of the lag data. Now, these numbers, and you can go back and pull up the state website on the Wayback Machine and see how the numbers have trended with EIA and what actually gets reported back in time by the state. This delta is pretty big. So this delta is larger than normal. If we go back to 2024, there was deltas of 40 to 50,000 barrels a day. If we go back to 2023, I think the numbers were pretty close. I didn't see anything over 40,000 barrels a day if you go back in time versus like go back and see what they were reporting in 2024 versus what the actual number turned out to be, which is what I'm using the number that's posted now. They were pretty close. However, 2022 did see deltas that were approximately this big. So it's not unprecedented to see deltas that are this big. And I would guess this is just a product of some operators in New Mexico are late in reporting their production to the state. It also could be the EIA data is too high. Like we said, the EIA data is not perfect. It's a sample. It's a formula that they're using and a model that they're using to get this number. But I wouldn't say and most people know this, don't look at the state data and see this and say the EIA is off 50 to 100,000 barrels a day. No, the state data is lagged. That's what's causing this. So another interesting area that I know a lot of other people don't look at. So a lot of people do look at the state data and compare it to the EIA data and say, okay, well, maybe EIA is a little bit high because of the trend of the state data. But you can actually look at the demand side of the equation. So let's switch from the supply side and look at the demand side. All that oil coming out of the ground in New Mexico and Texas has to go somewhere. It's either going into refineries or going into pipelines and leaving the basin. So Plainview, we can actually look at that, and we do look at that. We measure all these pipelines via the data that's reported to the state, and we'll talk about that here. So all stores and transporters of oil are required to submit a monthly T1 form. Basically says this is how much oil I received, this is how much oil I delivered to different places. And with that data, that's one of the pieces of data that Plainview uses to put on our platform to derive the flows on the pipeline. Refineries are also required to report, both in New Mexico and Texas, their throughputs. So the T1 data is due on the last day of the calendar month following the month covered. So in theory, it's only 1 month delayed. In reality, though, a lot of times these reports don't get posted for several months afterwards. So I would say right now we're dealing with pretty severe delays with the T1s being posted for several of these pipelines, including several of the Permian egress pipelines. So that's a challenge when we're looking at the demand side of the equation to be like, okay, are we actually seeing increases in pipeline egress and increases in or increases going through the refineries from all this supply coming out of the Permian? So that's a challenge when you don't have all the data. And I'll show you the data that we have. I would say the data that we do have shows demand largely flat June to July, but there are 9 large demand sources, and those are basically pipelines that have missing data for one of those months. So I'm not able to actually see what the delta is month to month. So I'll show these here. What you see here are the ones that in the table, the ones that we do have good data for both June and July. And as you can see, the demand side of the equation is largely flat. So this by itself would support the theory that the EIA's growth in supply may not be true. However, we have 9 pipelines that haven't reported yet. So we could see increases on these pipelines that support the production going up, and hopefully in the next few weeks we'll get that data. So closing remarks on production and my email there if you have questions. I think there's a lot of people out there that see the reduction in rigs and see the reduction in completion crews and think that we're going to see a material decrease in production in the U.S. The analysis what I'm going to say here is going to be largely narrative based. I'm not doing deep production analysis where I'm looking at decline curves and forecasting that way. But I do listen to what producers say, and I do look at the data pretty intensely. I would say, generally speaking, you need significant amounts of pain in this industry to cause producers to significantly lower their production. I do think that production will flatten out here. You may even see some small declines in some basins, but I don't think that you're going to see significant declines in production at $55 to $60 a barrel. So I don't see it based on what producers are saying. I don't see it based on what the Midstream is saying. One Oak came out, and perhaps they're talking their own book. One Oak came out in their earnings call this week and said they basically see the Permian growing through 2026. Even with those rig count declines and frac crews. So the efficiencies, potentially bigger wells are the answer there, and that's how they're able to continue to grow. But I wouldn't expect significant declines in U.S. production at $55 to $60. I think you need less. So there's my narrative-based thoughts on production. We'll see what happens and see if I look like a fool here in a few months. But we'll see. We will have stuff for earnings. We'll try to summarize some of the interesting stuff and informative things that we hear during the calls. I had a couple people ask me to do summaries of those, so we'll send something like that out, maybe weekly. Maybe I'll include it in Plainview Weekly. So everybody have a great earnings season. We'll have more videos out. Like I said, we'll show you guys some of the new stuff that we're doing with the platform once that rolls out in the next couple weeks. I hope everybody has a good week, and we'll talk to you next week.